be 3 or 4 years old, you will learn everything you need to know about negotiating from that child. Because does anyone have a 3 or 4-year-old? Okay, so what does your 3 or 4-year-old do when they want something? Do they, if you say no, do they stop?
No.
No. So they will keep going until they get what they want, and they know how to get it, right? So somewhere along the way, though, as women, we sometimes lose that skill. Maybe we get a little bit nervous, especially, is there anyone in here who is intimidated by negotiating with a man? Okay, thanks for your honesty. I didn't really think about that, but I have a client, a divorce client. I do a lot of things for her, and in our conversation, we have to hire an expert on something, and it happens to be a man. I didn't think anything of it, and she was so intimidated and afraid to talk to him. I had to give her this whole pep talk about talking with him, and I was just surprised. It made me realize, like, that is a real thing. Some women get very intimidated by the thought of negotiating in general, and then especially with a man. So that's something that you just have to build your confidence. And Melody and I did this talk the other day in Sorrento, and one of the things that came up at the very end is probably maybe a really good way to build your confidence on negotiating is go to the swap meet, say, and you want to buy a sweater or whatever it may be that you somewhat have an interest in. But you're not really that crazy, you don't have to have it, and they're asking $30, but you know you really only want to pay $20. That's negotiating, right? You offer them $20, they say no. You maybe start walking away, whatever, they come back, say, hey, $25. No, but you got to be negotiating on something that you're willing to walk from. So that's a good example of something easy. You're not going to be too stressed about that, but it's negotiating. Everything you do is negotiating. What movie are we going to? What are we going to eat for dinner? But then, those are kind of somewhat the less important things, but maybe more important in some ways, our personal lives. But when we're talking about business, it could be intimidating. And Melody's going to get more into the business aspect of it and contracts and writings and things like that. And so in our personal relationship, we sometimes have to think about what's more important. Is it more important to preserve the relationship with my child, my husband, my mother, whoever it might be, or is it more important to be right? And I know many times we dig our heels in, right? Because you know you're right. But how is that going to make the other person feel when you're right? So for me personally, I became an attorney, I'm not even sure why, but my oldest brother insisted, and he still does, that it's because I like to argue. And so up until a few years ago, I'd get into this, I thought it was a discussion, but I later realized it was an argument about whether or not I like to argue. And he would say, you like to argue. I'm like, no, I don't like to argue. And we go back and forth about liking to argue. And okay, fine, you know what? I like to argue, because I realized I was proving his point by debating this back and forth with him. But what I also realized is, I don't feel I like to argue. I like to negotiate. So, and there's a fine line, right? And when you could take the emotions out of it, it makes it more of a negotiation and it makes it easier to do. And that's why in your personal life, sometimes it's difficult because you're emotionally charged. And I see that with my divorce clients all the time. They're invested. They're digging their heels in. They know they want Johnny at 3 o'clock on Wednesday, not 3:05. And that 5 minutes is going to make all the difference. And me, I'm not invested in their situation in the same way they are. So I could step aside and help them negotiate with the other side in a way that they can't do themselves sometimes. So, got to step back. Is it a personal situation? Obviously, you're going to negotiate in a different way. Is it a business situation? That's different. But we could still be strong, and as women, we don't have to negotiate or talk like men do. We all have our styles. My style might be totally different than yours, but you've got to pick what works for you. And hopefully as you grow as a woman, as a person, as a businesswoman, you realize what works and doesn't work for you. And you have to develop that. And part of doing it is just trial and error. You try it, it didn't work, or it didn't feel comfortable for you. So you readjust and you do it a different way. So when you're negotiating, say in business, does anyone have a need to negotiate in business? Do people negotiate? Some of you? I would think most of you do it. Most people run their own business, right? So you get clients. It's kind of a negotiation, right? You're asking for a certain amount of money, Maybe they're not willing to pay it, maybe they are, they want this, you want to give that. Those are all negotiations. So where do you start? So sometimes I find it best to start on things that you can actually agree on. So you might know that you can agree on terms X, Y, and Z. So you start there. So Alicia, I know we're negotiating this, we're talking about this, and are you good with X? Then you give me the, yes, we are. Are you good with Y? Maybe you are, maybe you're not, maybe we discuss it a little bit. But we pick the easiest things that we can get yeses on and start there, because it kind of creates some goodwill. We're talking, we've got things moving in a positive direction. And then there might be some things that are kind of deal breakers. So maybe we just can't negotiate those. Maybe it's just a term that we're just not going to find acceptable. So I have an example, like in my life, I have a gym that I've been going to for 14 years. And today was probably my last workout there because they're closing. And it was a situation where there's a problem with the ceiling for like 2 years. It's been leaking over the pool. They closed the pool and the landlord won't fix it. The gym won't fix it. So people have left because they can't use the pool, whatever. And so finally they went to court. They couldn't reach a settlement of who was going to pay what. And now they're going to just close the place. So you would think in negotiation, there's two big companies, that someone could have helped them negotiate a situation where it would have got fixed. And instead, for whatever reason, they reached an impasse. Now that's too bad, but that's the real life, is sometimes in business or in life, we just can't negotiate. The other side won't give in to what we want. It's a deal breaker for us, and you've got to walk from the situation. So unfortunately, that's what they've chosen to do, and it impacts a lot of people. Now in your personal life or in your business, that sometimes happens. You may get a client who you just really want that client, but you know that they're going to be very difficult for whatever reason. And that's something you have to listen to your own instincts as well in terms of red flags. Someone calls you up, like for me, someone calls up and they've already gone through, say, 4 attorneys, and I would be number 5 or number 6. Perfect example, met with this guy last year who I would have been, I think, attorney number 6. And then he started telling me about how this attorney wasn't good and that one wasn't good, and some of them I knew, and I knew them to be good attorneys, and they were incompetent, and the other side's attorney, he was so mad at her, he felt like punching her. To me, it was like, oh my God, this is like a major red flag. I'm not taking this guy's case no matter what. But, you know, there's times where someone comes to you and you need the business. You're a little bit slow, you're a little bit in need of the finances, because it doesn't all run smooth when you're running your business. But you have to evaluate, is it worth taking that client? Because sometimes it is just, those red flags are there for a reason. You need to pay attention to them, and you could turn away the business. But with that said, you take clients, and sometimes you don't see those red flags until you're into the situation. So it's important that going in, you know what to expect, they know what to expect of you, and you have a good contract. And so when you're doing business, you really should have a written contract. It doesn't have to be something long. It could be 1 page, but it should be something that fits your business, that you've had, if you can afford to, had an attorney like Melody look at for you. That has some basic things in there. There's terms of a contract, basically an offer. So I'm offering Diane such and such amount of money for her services, and she's in return going to give me whatever it is she's giving me. And then we've accepted those terms. And then there's something called consideration, which is basically I'm paying her X amount of dollars for what she's giving me. So those are the kind of the basic terms in a contract. And then you want to be specific. And a contract should always be signed by both parties and dated. And one of the things too, so say we draft this great contract, I meet with Diane, and then I realize, you know what, I'm not happy about this particular term right there. We could actually cross it off, initial it, we both would initial it, put the date again, and we could change the contract. So a contract doesn't mean it's like, oh my gosh, this is so intimidating. It could be something very simple, but it has to be something that could be held up in court if you were to be sued or you need to sue the other party. And so a contract should be in writing. So Melody's going to talk in more detail about that. But that's something that should be negotiated. You don't have to feel like, oh my gosh, this person presented me this contract, I have to sign it the way it is. You can negotiate a contract. Now, it depends who you're doing business with. A big company, you may not have as much leverage or as much room to negotiate. But in a smaller situation, and we're all small business people, people will negotiate with you and you can negotiate with them. But you have to feel that you are comfortable in doing so and not be intimidated. And it's just going to take practice. And then I would suggest that when you have a victory in business or in other things in life, kind of celebrate your victory. Discuss it with your friends or your family or whatever. Because I think sometimes we just go into the next situation and we don't give ourselves like the pat on the back that we deserve for our victory. So Melody's going to talk more about contracts, and we'll be here afterwards. Did you have a question?
Hopefully, just a quick question. If it's business to business, which side provides the contract?
You know
Or
that
do you both?
either one of you, Melody's going to talk about that, but either one can, but she's going to talk more about that.
Thank you. I didn't have a chance to tell her I sort of changed what I'm going to tell you
Oh,
from
okay.
Tuesday, so that's okay. She covered a lot of stuff. In response to your question, that's a very important thing. As business people, we should have our own contracts drafted that we have for if the other side doesn't have one. But we need